Good morning, everyone. How we doing? Good. As we can read the barrel here, somebody's got jokes this morning already. But reality is, I need like 2 or 3 more of those. As a dentist, I'm allowed to eat the sweets. You guys aren't, okay? So, we've been covering this is now the 3rd week of our spring series. It's going to be a 3-month series on preppers. We're looking at the concept of prepping, making preparations for something or to do something. And the first week, PD spoke about God being the ultimate prepper. There are 6 C's. I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't write them all down, because what I want you to do is I want you to go back and listen to his message. Those 6 C's are crucial. The first one was creation, in case you're wondering, okay? There was Christ, there was the church, and a few others. Go back and listen to that message if you didn't get a chance. Or if you even were here, go back and listen to it again. It's a great message. Last week we looked at Noah, who showed us the importance of having a right relationship with God. And at the end of it, what did he talk about? Not missing the what? Somebody? Anybody? The boat, right? Don't miss the boat. If you miss the boat, you're not going to make it. So, from there, today we're going to talk about another person, another gentleman. And before we get there, there's a reason we're going to look at him. So look behind me here, okay? All this stuff. Anybody got a room like this in their house? Anybody want to admit to having a room like this in their house? Not really? So I'm going to try to not spill my drink here real quick, so I'm going to move it. So when we start talking about prepping, we get stashes like this, right? Look here, your basics are covered. And it looks great, probably for most instances you're ever going to run into. But, so I'm going to pull this off the shelf. Anybody tell me what this is? A pressure cooker, right? What's it used for? Canning, right? So, raise your hand if you know what a pressure cooker is. Wow, that's a lot of people. That's good. Even the young kids knew. Raise your hand if you've ever used a pressure cooker for canning. All right, I'm done. I'm going home. I didn't expect that many, seriously. So I did not expect that many. Because if you think about it, I've talked to people over the last couple of weeks about gardening and canning and these kind of things. You'd be surprised the number of people who said to me, I don't know how to use one of these. I've never canned anything. So we need to start looking beyond stashing stuff and start learning skills. Because what good is this if we don't know how to use it? It's just a big soup pot, right? People like that much soup? I mean, I like a lot of soup, depending on what kind it is, but that's still a lot of soup. 22 quarts of soup's a lot. So if we're not learning the skills for the things we're stashing away, are we really preparing ourselves like God would like us to? Or are we just putting it on the shelf for later, just in case? So I'm going to be done with that. You ready? How many of you in here have seen the movie The Karate Kid? Okay, I'm not talking that 2000s version with Will Smith's boy and Jackie Chan, okay? So the original early 80s Karate Kid. Danny LaRusso, Johnny Lawrence, Mr. Miyagi. We know these people, right? Some of you don't, and that's okay. We won't beat you before the service. We'll beat you after the service. So if you don't know who they are, just so that we know who we're targeting, raise your hands real quick. But it's one of those iconic mid-'80s movies. I think it was about 84 when it came out, right? We see Danny LaRusso, the kid from New Jersey with the strong Jersey accent. And if you've never heard a Jersey accent, I encourage you to go listen to it. You won't ever miss it again. We had a kid in dental school when I was there from New Jersey. He was the only kid in the class. And everybody made fun of him because he referred to New Jersey as the armpit of America. So for 4 years, he was the armpit of all the jokes that were cracked. Okay? So Danny LaRusso's mom packs him up, sends him from New Jersey on the East Coast, California on the West Coast, right? Think about this. This day and age, that's not a big travel for us. We hop a plane, pack some luggage, boom, we're gone, right? Be there in 4 hours, max. In the 80s, that was a little bit more of a haul. Single mom, grabbing her kid, going to the other side of the country, has nothing. That was a couple-day journey. And if you've ever seen a movie, she drives this awesome station wagon, right? You remember the one you could sit backwards in and stare out the window as your parents are driving? Can't do that anymore. It did have seatbelts, if I remember correctly. So Danny struggles to make friends when he gets there. He's the new kid. How many have ever been the new kid inside of a school somewhere? It can be hard, can't it? It can be really hard, right? Who do you hang out with? You don't know anybody. What's the rules? What's the atmosphere? Danny is pretty confident, though. He's got a little charisma to him. So what's he do? Man, he takes a liking to the prettiest girl in the school. Genius move, right? Except Johnny is her ex-boyfriend. And that's not such a genius move because Johnny attends a local karate dojo with a bunch of his buddies named, come on kids, tell me, Cobra Kai, right? And so for all you kids now, we've now connected you to a 1980s movie through a new Netflix series or Amazon originally series of Cobra Kai, right? You're welcome. 40 years. I just brought you up 40 years to speed like that. Problem is, Danny's little infatuation with the girlfriend gets him in trouble. And the Cobra Kai boys start beating on him, torturing him, abusing him. He doesn't know how to handle himself. He's getting his tail kicked. This kid, okay, listen, I looked like Danny a little bit when I know it's hard to envision. I was like a third of my size, okay? $125, graduated high school, 5'10", skinny, right? Now I'm $145, 6'2", right? I said $1.45, right? But the reality is, Danny didn't know how to defend himself. So somebody comes to his aid. Anybody remember who that is? Mr. Miyagi, right? The short little custodian or janitorial maintenance worker at the apartment complex where they live. He has no relationship with Danny, but Danny thinks this is the coolest thing ever because he just watched some kids who know karate get their tails kicked. So what's he want to do? Teach me, right? Reluctantly, Miyagi says, I'll do it. Come on out to the house, we'll teach you. Danny doesn't know what he's in for. He doesn't know what he's in for. So he spends several days, I heard somebody just say it, okay? And you got to make sure you do it right. Wax on, wax off, right? Paint the fence, up-down motions, right? Sand the floor, inward circles, right? And then we're going to paint the house. Several days of this goes on. Danny is frustrated. I didn't come out here to be your maintenance man. I'm not learning anything. He doesn't say it as gentle as that, if I remember correctly in the movie, right? And Miyagi teaches him a quick lesson, a very valuable lesson. The skills he was learning, he didn't connect to preparing him for the future. He didn't connect the fact that waxing the floor or waxing the cars or painting the fence would ever be anything he'd learned from karate. His idea of karate was the white suit and the belt, little headband, right? We're all in. Not sanding the floors, right? So much like Danny, I had a point in my life where I was learning something and I was being prepared and I didn't realize it. Fast forward for me, 1998, graduate from college, I'm headed off to dental school. Get into dental school, I'm learning all about dentistry, right? I'm super excited. I'm drilling, I'm filling, I'm making dentures, I'm fixing people's teeth. I'm doing things I don't like, but that's part of the process. Books, I didn't like the books part, but that's okay. Like anybody who's been to school that long understands they don't like books. What happens is I'm dreaming, right? I'm learning about a type of dentistry where I'm running 4 chairs at a time. I'm running from this patient to that patient to this patient. That patient, go do a hygiene check, come back. That's not me. If I wanted to work in a factory my whole life, that's what I'd have done. I'd have just gone to work in a factory. That's not the style of dentistry I wanted personally or that I wanted to practice. So I had a dream. I had a dream. I was going to own my own office. And I was going to do this right out of dental school. It's pretty unheard of. Because I can tell you, dental school, 4 years, I took one business class. Okay? One business class. I was so prepared to run a business. I had a dream I was going to do it from day one. Yeah, it didn't work out that way. Okay, my dream kind of fell short. I was in negotiations to look at buying an office right out of school. Things were going good. Kind of, I thought. But the reality is, I didn't know how to navigate the process. I never applied for a loan. I didn't know anything about putting collateral down. The only thing I owned were 30 or 40 textbooks and a beat-up car. Trying to think, what else did I own? That might have been about it. I was short on collateral. And there was a bunch of other reasons that eventually this deal just didn't work out. So here I am sitting in my parents' restaurant that they owned, waiting tables. Anybody ever wait tables? You know, I don't think you truly understand customer service till you've ever waited tables. Because there are good people to wait on and bad people to wait on. And I encourage you, if you're sitting at the table thinking, what's a bad person to wait on? You might be that person. Okay? You might. So think about it. So I remember somebody had given my name to another dentist who was looking to hire a young guy out of school or even somebody with a little bit of experience. So I jump, right? Guy calls me. I'm working for my mom and dad. I'm taking orders that day. And you ever seen that pad that they get, the carbon copy? And I'm writing on it. This guy wants me to do the grunt work. But I was waiting tables, so I probably needed to go do some grunt work to make some money to help pay some bills that I had acquired in dental school. 2 weeks later, I interviewed with the guy. Clearly not my dream job, right? I didn't want to do grunt work. I was told when I graduated dental school, you're going to be an awesome dentist. And you're going to do great things, and we're going to teach you everything you ever need to know, right? With one business class. I hired on with the guy. I worked for him for a little over 2 years. 2 years, okay? Eventually I decided it's time to do my own thing. I thought I was ready again at this point to buy an office. Okay? So I looked. And I was kind of eager to get away from where I was, so I jumped pretty quickly on the first thing that came along. And then somebody asked me as I was leaving that day from that first office I worked at, are you upset with him? Or was I upset with him? Right? That is a question I hadn't thought about. I'm not sure I was prepared to answer that question. Was I upset with him? I felt slighted. I'd grown his business to almost double what it was when I hired on, and my pay didn't reflect that, okay? We had agreed that he would cover 90% of the emergency work on weekends and the days were closed. Guess who was doing it? Okay, I was spending my family time at the office taking care of it. That wasn't our arrangement. And I worked for just over a year without a contract. Anybody ever worked in a contract job without a contract? It's a little unnerving. It's unnerving because literally I could have walked in there tomorrow and he'd have been like, yeah, I don't need you today, go home. What do I do, right? You know what I did? I kept my schedule as packed as I could, so if he did it, it'd make it inconvenient for him. That's what I did. But those things, as much as they hurt, I didn't feel valued. But was I upset with him? Maybe a little bit. Did I have a right? Maybe a little bit. But the more I thought about it, I don't think I was angry with him. I had learned some valuable lessons in those 2 years, okay? I'd built confidence in myself. I'd figured out who I was as a dentist. I figured out what my strengths and weaknesses were. I decided who I wanted to see for patient populations. I understood what it was like to hire a good employee. I understood what it was like to hire a bad employee because I'd seen it and I dealt with it, right? I knew what it took to keep a good employee because he kind of modeled it a little bit for me. And the things he modeled poorly, I took to heart. There were good lessons and bad lessons here. So in reality, buying an office right out of school could have been my biggest mistake. It really could have. I was immature in who I was, not only as a dentist, but as a boss and an owner. I could have really have killed my career professionally and my family's financial future. It really could have put us in a bad place. I wasn't ready to lead others, but I didn't give up on my dream, okay? Working for somebody else actually prepared me for where I stand here 20 years later. It wasn't my dream. It didn't go as planned, but it prepared me for where I'm at today. So I want you to take a few minutes here, okay? And I want you to talk at your tables. And I want you to think about a time that you were asked to learn something, or a task was assigned to you, and maybe it didn't make much sense till later. And then more importantly, I want you to share, what did you learn from it? Take 2 or 3 minutes, okay?
Prepping. If you're on an island, now if you're crashed there, you're out of luck. But if you know you're going to an island for a period of time, like the show Survivor or something like that, you'd want to prep ahead of time. So what Nick is going to talk about now is a character in the Bible who learned some things along the way. At the time it didn't make sense, but it made him a better person. But he also learned the art of prepping.
So what does this all have to do with what we're learning about today, right? We're talking about pots and axes and first aid kits, water filters, waxing on, becoming leaders, right? The story we're going to talk about today is Joseph, the son of Jacob, which has highs and lows, much like our lives do. And those things help prepare him for his future. So in Scripture, we're going to watch a young man grow into a leader that he is at the end of Genesis. How many of you ever heard of the book, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickinson? How many of you already read it? Nice, there's some brave people there. I had to read this in high school. I don't think they make kids read books like this anymore in high school. No? Somebody was quick to answer that. No way! But there's a quote in A Tale of Two Cities that I think sums this up. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times, right? So even though you may not have read the book or seen the book, you know the quote, right? And even though it's not from the Bible, it really reflects Joseph's life as a whole. So I want you to get your Bibles or your phones, whatever media you use, and I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 37. Okay, so today we're primarily going to be reading between chapter 37 and chapter 50 in Genesis. And listen, the story of Joseph is a big, long one. I am not going to ask you to read 14 chapters in the Bible today, unless you really want to, and then I'll just go take a seat. We'll pick up at the end in a few minutes, okay? So I'm going to give you the quick rundown, the quick synopsis, the Nick version summation, okay? So we see Joseph, who was the first son of Jacob and Rachel, okay? But he was the 11th son of Jacob. So Jacob's got other wives. We're not going to get into that today. It's a whole nother thing. We're going to focus on Joseph. And we pick up where Joseph is about 17 years old. And as a young boy, he quickly becomes his dad's favorite, which doesn't sit well with the others. So if we turn to Genesis 37, verses 3 and 4, and I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, so the words may be a little different. The concept is completely the same. Okay? Verses 3 and 4. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. How many of you got a brother or a sister who just absolutely can't say a good word to you? That's a rough concept for me. Listen, my brother and I, we tussle a little bit. That's a rough concept for me. Okay? I still love the kid. Most days. Okay? If I'm being honest. These passages really begin the story of up and downs for Joseph's life. We see the rest of Genesis 37 that Joseph is this dreamer. And he reveals two dreams to his family. Family being brothers and then his dad and his brothers, okay? And in reality, they tell him, hey, Joe, you've gotten a little big for your britches. Because these two dreams reveal that at some point he will rule over not only his brothers, but even his mom and dad. He will lord over them at some point. Brothers doesn't sit well with. They're done, right? So what do? They plot to kill him. They take him out and they throw him in a pit. And then somebody has a second thought on this. Maybe we shouldn't quite kill him. We don't really want the blood on our hands. We're going to sell him. So they sell him to some Ishmaelite traders. And these traders take him to Egypt and sell him again. Okay? Not a real high point in his life. Take your little brother out, throw him in a pit, sell him. And then they went back and told Dad, by the way, he's dead. Not a real high point for Joseph. This jealous family situation, as it turns out, isn't good for Joseph. It's a real low point. But he doesn't give up. Because we see in Genesis 39, Joseph is sold in Egypt to a gentleman named Potiphar. You familiar with Potiphar? You might be. You might not be. Potiphar is the captain of the guard for a gentleman named Pharaoh. Familiar with Pharaoh? Pharaoh was the king of Egypt, right? He led Egypt. And in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 39, we read, the Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. Here's a kid who was just sold into slavery, bought out by a prominent Egyptian, and given a pretty decent job and was successful at it. Kind of a high point, right? We went from a low to a high. You see, God hadn't given up on Joseph like his siblings had. God appears to have bigger plans here for Joseph. So fast forward to the end of Genesis 39. Joseph runs into another low point in his life. This gentleman he's working for, Potiphar, has a wife. Dun, dun, dun. Right? Enter the woman in the room. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, but I'm not. The reality is, Potiphar's wife kind of liked Joseph, took a little liking to him. Joseph wouldn't give in. So she accuses Joseph of an inappropriate encounter and then runs back and tells her husband. What do you think her husband said? Right, off with his head, right? He didn't quite kill him, okay? Probably should have. Would have been acceptable. So what's he do? Throws him in prison. Uh-oh. Here he is, another low point, right? But is it really? Because we see at the end of Genesis in verses 21 through 23, ready for this? But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in prison. Pretty good gig, right? The warden had no worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. If you got to be in prison, don't you kind of want to be the big prison guy? Shawshank Redemption comes to mind here, right? Right? You start to run the prison. You make everybody else's job easy. So while Joseph was in jail, he runs into two guys who used to work for Pharaoh. A baker, not a candlestick maker, okay? A cupbearer, okay? These guys at some point had done something to offend Pharaoh, and Pharaoh threw them into the prison. So he has an encounter with these two guys. And in Genesis 40, verse 8b, we see that Joseph is learning something from his previous experiences. Okay? Because he is asked to interpret a dream for these two gentlemen. And we see, and they replied. We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead, tell me your dreams. We don't see this same conversation happen when he tells the dreams to his brothers and his dad. He just tells them of the great things he's dreaming of. He doesn't reflect on God. 2 years later after this, those dreams had come true that he interpreted for the cupbearer and the baker. One ended poorly, one ended very well. But they ended just like he said they would. So 2 years later, Pharaoh is having some dreams. The king of Egypt, right? Just so you know, people of importance have dreams too. Pharaoh's having dreams, and nobody can interpret them. Nobody is giving him the answers to his dreams. So the cupbearer, the guy he was in prison with, says, you know what? There was this guy I was locked up with. His name was Joseph. Let's get him in here. He told me my dreams, and they came true. So what's Pharaoh do? Boom, brings him. Bring him to me, right? Bring him to me. Joseph standing in front of him in Genesis 41:16 says, "It is beyond my power to do this," Joseph replied, "but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease." Not Joseph, God. Can you imagine standing in front of the king of Egypt and telling him, I know you called me, but it's not me, it's God. A God you probably don't even believe in. He took a risk, right? If things went poorly, he's dead. He could have just been killed right there for even mentioning God, because that's not the God that Pharaoh understood. But he took the opportunity to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and that led Joseph to being placed into a position of power. The dreams of Pharaoh predicted 7 years of prosperity for Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. And while I say Egypt, it includes the surrounding areas. This ultimately leads to Joseph's father, Jacob, sending Joe's brothers to Egypt because they needed supplies to help survive the famine that they were enduring. So when they arrived in Egypt, and they said, guess who they were taken to talk to? Exactly. They didn't get to talk to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. They get to talk to Joseph because Pharaoh after hearing Joseph's interpretation of the dreams, put him in power to handle these affairs. Joseph has every right to be revengeful and angry with his siblings. And as I'm standing here in front of you today, if my brother had done to me what they did to Joe, I'm not sure that I would have acted in the same responsible manner. I might have charged him a little extra. I probably wouldn't have killed him. I would have charged him a little extra, though. We'd have hurt him in his pocketbook, or I might have held back the best grain. He'd have got the leftovers. I probably wouldn't have given him the prime cuts of anything. Because that's me as a man, right? That's me as a sinful man. But we see in Genesis 45, verses 7 through 8, Joseph's response. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. Would you have responded that way if your brothers had thrown you in a pit and sold you? It's not because of you I'm standing here. It's because of God I'm standing here. It's a powerful statement. So as we go on to the end of Genesis 45 and into Genesis 47, we see Pharaoh give his blessing and actually invite Joseph's family to join them in Egypt. Pharaoh really liked Joseph. He thought very highly of Joseph. Not only does he think highly of him, he said, bring your family, I will give you my best land. I will give your animals the best we have to eat of. And your brothers that don't have jobs, I'll hire them. Joseph has a little clout here with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh understands it. But he understands that it's coming from God. So we see a 17-year-old boy who has grown with the guidance of God, who was a messenger for his father. Let's be honest, messenger's being gentle here. He was kind of a mole for his dad. Go tell me what the older boys are doing. Come back and rat them out a little bit. We see that happen, right? Becomes the second most powerful in Egypt. His teenage dream of leading his family has come true. I don't know if he fully understands it, but it's come true. And I don't know if his brothers and his dad understand it, but it's there. So what lessons can we take from this brief synopsis? Listen, I'm going to encourage you to go back and read chapters 37 to 50. It is amazing to read. I've read it several times, and I'm telling you, every time I read, I get something more. But what lessons can we gain from that, okay? So as we look at Joseph's life of ups and downs or highs or lows, what do we learn from him? First thing, spiritual immaturity can lead to big problems. And you're thinking, well, Joseph wasn't spiritually immature, was he? Well, I'm sure he had his moments, okay? But let's talk about Joseph's brothers. They clearly didn't have the same level of spiritual maturity that he had. When they heard about Joseph telling them his dreams of ruling over them, they didn't like that. Because in their head, they're thinking, dude, you're the 11th of 12. When dad dies, you get the scrapings at the bottom of the pile. We're in line for the cream of the crop. They're worried about their birth order and their inheritance and their birthrights. They don't want a younger brother telling them what to do. Got a younger sibling? We got the youngest siblings in here? Raise your hand. Your older siblings don't want to hear it, do they? They don't, do they? You're supposed to go to that person who's 12 months or less older than you, who was such a sage in life, because they have 12 months of experience and knowledge. right? They couldn't understand it. Instead of using their maturity to help their brother understand his calling, they turned to defiance. Their eyes were focused on this worldview, not on what God had planned in their place. He had the potential for 10 older brothers to pour into him and a father to shape him and help him hone a gift that God had given him. But they weren't secure in their own relationship with God. They weren't spiritually mature enough to be able to help that happen. The second thing we can look at, Joseph did not allow circumstances of his life to impede his leadership development. You see, Joseph had a very difficult family dynamic. He had some brothers who didn't like him, a bunch of stepmoms, right? He'd been sold into slavery. He'd been wrongly accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into jail. He'd been forgotten by the cupbearer, who promised to remember him immediately when he got out. But he didn't. And Joseph didn't have this bunker mentality. Do you guys understand what I mean when I say bunker mentality? He didn't go into a place and isolate himself and just get hung up on what he hadn't gotten or what wasn't being fulfilled in the promise to him. He didn't stop living life. He didn't just give up when he was down and out. Joseph didn't do this. You know, he didn't hang his head. He didn't sit down and do nothing. Okay? Joseph kept moving forward. We see this with Jesus, and P.D. has mentioned this before, that we have people in the Bible who are a type of Jesus. Joseph is one of these guys. Ups, downs, ups, downs. Jesus had times where he talked to people and they just didn't take it. One instance, Luke chapter 4, verse 30, okay? Jesus has returned to his hometown in Nazareth, right? We should all be heroes when we go home, right? All of us, especially the Messiah. He goes to his hometown, goes to the synagogue, starts teaching. He basically tells them, I am here. Today it is done. But you know what they wanted? Miracles. And so they literally push him to the edge of a cliff, right? Getting ready to hit a low here. Actually, I don't run into anything. What does Jesus do? He doesn't let that stop him. He pushes right through, walks right through them, right? He goes right through them. So what excuses are you using to impede the leader you can be? Fear, doubt, lack of experience, or maybe a bad experience, right? We've all had those. Shame. Maybe you're worried about your image, right? Does that stop you from being the leader you should be and can be? Think about it. The third thing we're going to look at. Joseph used his leadership to influence people in a positive and godly way. He used his leadership. The Lord used Joseph, the Lord, God, right? Used Joseph to influence different people at different points in his life. We can start with his brothers. They didn't listen though, right? We can start with the prison warden, the baker and the cupbearer. That story didn't end well for the baker, but he could have fibbed. He could have told a little white lie there, right? He could have just said, I don't understand your dream. But he didn't. He was honest with the guy. You're going to get impaled. It's not going to end well for you. Sorry, buddy. It is what it is. Potiphar, he influenced Potiphar, right? And we saw that the Lord was with him. But Potiphar clearly let his wife have more influence over himself than he did Joseph. Pharaoh, who would have ever thought a slave who was thrown in prison would have the influence over the number one guy in Egypt? Could any of you in this room imagine having that kind of influence over the President of the United States? No? But you could. Right? It's not funny, Jackie. Ultimately, we see the family return to Joseph. And at the end of Genesis, we see his influence again come back to the family, right? So our actions, that's a lot of vowels, and words representing of God. Are we living as godly examples for those we come into contact and those who see us? We have no control over the person we're influencing. I can't will your salvation. I can't will your salvation. I can't will yours. I ultimately have zero control over the person I'm influencing. If they choose to go a different way than God is telling them, that's their choice. But it is my responsibility as a leader to show them what we can do. We are called to be in the world, not of the world. And we need to be in that world because the person that God wants us to be needs to be reflected in that world. A world that either doesn't know him, doesn't care to live by him, doesn't care to let him live through them. We need to be a part of that. So let's look at some applications. How can we be more like Joseph as God is preparing us to be better leaders in our lives and in the lives of others? Number one, leaders listen, right? Leaders listen. And in Genesis 41, verses 14 to 16, Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It's beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied. But God can tell you what it means and set your mind at ease. Joseph's a listener. He's a listener. He's listening to Pharaoh. He's listening to God so that he can relay that message that Pharaoh's looking for. If Joseph had taken his first two dreams to heart and focused on ruling his family at the age of 17, instead of listening to his father who sent him out to check on his brothers, the entire story takes a left turn. It's weird being up here. takes a left turn. And Joseph might never have become who he is. If he had not listened and obeyed to God, he may never have become the important figure that Potiphar made him. If Joseph never listened to the prison warden and followed the rules, he probably wouldn't have been appointed to look over the entire prison, which would have never have led to the meeting with the baker and cupbearer. If the meeting with the cupbearer never happens, he wouldn't have been selected to go stand in front of Pharaoh and interpret the dreams of the second most powerful, or of the most powerful man in Egypt. And if he hadn't listened to Pharaoh and given him a job description and created his own office, essentially, Pharaoh would have never have looked at him and said, guess what? You're the man. I'm putting you in that job. If he hadn't risen to power in Egypt, he may never have been given the opportunity to reconcile with his family. All because he listened. He listened to all of these people. Are you listening? The second thing we can take away from it. Leaders, look. Leaders look for opportunities. In Genesis 40, verses 5 through 8, while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." You guys are probably tired of hearing me say that, but he's looking for opportunities. Leaders don't kick back and wait for success to fall into their laps. They keep looking for the next opportunity, the next step forward, the next moment to move upward. In the Bible, Joseph was a dreamer, but being sold into slavery wasn't his dream. He responded by serving Potiphar to the best of his God-given ability, which worked out pretty good for him until Potiphar's wife derailed that situation, right? Being in prison wasn't Joe's dream either. I don't think as a man, prison would be a high point in my life, right? But he didn't let that knock him down. He didn't give up on life. Instead, he created an environment where with the prison warden, he got a favorable position. Being left behind after interpreting the cupbearer's dream, who promised to come back immediately for him, wasn't his dream. Taking a risk by interpreting Pharaoh's dream and ultimately becoming his right-hand man led to fulfilling the dream Joseph had as a child, right? Through all of this, he never stopped looking for the next opportunity. He seized each moment he was knocked down and stood back up and went after the next thing. He was always looking for something new. So, in your life, are you pouting? Are you jaded by something bad that happened? Or are you looking for the next thing? Or more importantly, are you choosing to turn a blind eye to what God has planned for you? God has plans for each of us. And it's really easy sometimes to focus on the negative and not look at the positive. So are you looking for what God's asking you to do? The third thing, you're waiting for me to point at something, right? I'm not. So are you leading, right? Are people following you? Are you leading by example? Leaders lead by example. And the reality is, most of us don't bother to look and see who's following. So Genesis 40, verses 9 through 22. I'm not going to read them. We're reading too much. Genesis 41, 33 to 36. I'm not going to read that either. In Genesis 40, Joseph could have excluded the story of the baker. He didn't have to include that. He chose to do it. And in Genesis 41, his attention to detail in listing what Pharaoh was looking for is pretty amazing. Great leaders don't take shortcuts or cut corners. They take pride in their work. Joseph was able to prove himself to Potiphar, the prison warden, and ultimately Pharaoh, because he decided that doing the best he could, knowing that God would be with him throughout the entire time, was something he wanted to pride himself in. He put in the hard work, the long hours. He made sure that when he was doing his job, others were watching him and they could see the expertise he wanted to show, the level of attention to detail he wanted. He earned the positions he was given because he was a man of integrity. And his faith in God didn't go unnoticed. Potiphar noticed it. The cupbearer, the baker, Pharaoh, they all noticed it. We don't see Joseph taking the shortcuts or cutting corners because he was all in for every job he was appointed to. Are you listening, looking, and leading by example? These are 3 skills that God has given us, not to put on a shelf like this box, right? We have these skills, this great pressure canner. The problem is, I don't know how to use it. I'll pick it up later when I have time, right? So I'm just going to walk over here and, hey, God, it's okay. I'll get it later. I think that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to put skills that He has given us to become better leaders on a shelf. No. He wants us to use them so that we can show others what God's doing in our lives. What dreams is God showing to you? Let's bow our heads. Lord, please use the next couple of days to reveal to us how we can use the areas of looking, listening, and leading in our lives. We ask that you speak into us what your desires and plans are for our futures. Please help us to look for opportunities where we can turn a low time in our lives into a high time in yours. Help us to lead others by examples you have shown us in your word. Most importantly, help us to develop these skills now and not place them on a shelf for later. Much like the pressure canner from earlier, possessing it isn't merely enough. We must obtain the skills and grow in each area. Father, we offer thanks as we go forward into this week. Amen.